My son called to tell me I'd get nothing from his mother's will, but he didn't know about the legal trap I'd set 15 years ago. The phone was buzzing on my workbench while I was putting the finishing touches on a custom steel railing for the Henderson house. I'd been working on it for 3 weeks, hand-forging every detail, making sure each curve was perfect. That's the kind of work that built Morrison Manufacturing's reputation, the kind Roger thinks is a waste of time. I'm David Morrison, 55 years old, and I've been shaping metal since I was old enough to hold a hammer. Started learning from my father in his little shop behind our house, spent 30 years building this business from nothing into something people respect, at least people who understand the value of quality craftsmanship. When I saw Roger's name on the phone screen, my stomach dropped. My son hadn't called me in almost 3 years, not since our last big fight about the direction of the company. These days, he communicates through his assistant or corporate memos. Real personal touch. I let it ring a few times while I set down my tools. No point seeming eager to talk to someone who treats me like I'm an embarrassment to the family name. David, not Dad or Pop like when he was little and used to come to the shop after school to watch me work. Roger. What's the occasion? Mother passed away yesterday evening. His voice was flat, businesslike, like he was reporting quarterly earnings. Dorothy, my ex-wife, the woman who'd stood beside me when we started Morrison Manufacturing in our garage 25 years ago. Back then, she understood what we were building. She knew every client by name, helped me price jobs, even learned to read blueprints so she could help with estimates. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and meant every word. Whatever happened between us during the divorce, Dorothy had been a good partner in the early days. Before success changed her, before she decided I wasn't sophisticated, enough for the life she wanted. The funeral is tomorrow morning. Private ceremony. Translation, don't even think about showing up. I understand. There's a will reading on Thursday at 10 a.m., Davies and Associates downtown. But honestly, David, you shouldn't bother attending. She left everything to me. The house, all her investments, and most importantly, her 60% stake in Morrison Manufacturing. That 60% stake. The majority control that had been hanging over my head for 15 years, ever since the divorce. Dorothy had insisted on keeping it, said it was better for business stability. I'd kept my 40% and stayed on as operations manager, thinking we could make it work for Roger's benefit. Total estate value is about $8 million, Roger continued, unable to keep the satisfaction out of his voice. Plus, her share of the company. Conservative estimate puts Morrison Manufacturing at around $50 million now. Not bad for something that started in a garage, right? $50 million. He said it like he'd built it himself, instead of inheriting it from 2 people who'd worked 16-hour days and lived on bologna sandwiches for the first 5 years. I built that value, Roger, your mother and I. Sure, but you've been holding us back for years with your insistence on custom work and small batch production. I've got plans to streamline operations, outsource the basic fabrication, focus on higher volume contracts, real business thinking, like laying off guys who'd been with us for 20 years so he could pad the profit margins, like taking contracts for cheap prefab work that any shop could do instead of the custom architectural metalwork that made us special. I'll be there Thursday, I said. A pause, then a laugh. Why? To embarrass yourself? David, I'm trying to save you some dignity here. The will is ironclad. Mother made sure you were taken care of in the divorce settlement. That's the end of your connection to this company. We'll see. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You've got your little workshop, your handful of custom projects. That's more than most men your age can say. Be grateful for what you have. His little workshop. The 8,000 square foot facility where we employed 23 people and produced some of the finest metalwork on the East Coast. Roger saw it as quaint, outdated. I saw it as the foundation everything else was built on. Thursday at 10, I said. I'll see you there. I hung up before he could respond, stood there in my shop, surrounded by the tools and machinery that represented my life's work, and felt that familiar mix of anger and sadness that came with thinking about how far apart my son and I had drifted. Roger wasn't always like this. When he was young, he loved coming to the shop. He'd sit on a milk crate and watch me work, asking a million questions about how metal bent and why certain joints were stronger than others. I taught him to use a hammer when he was 8, showed him how to read the color of hot, Steal, how to feel when a piece was ready to shape. But somewhere along the way, Dorothy started filling his head with different ideas. College prep instead of shop class. Business school instead of trade school. Summer internships at downtown firms instead of learning the family business from the ground up. By the time he graduated with his MBA, Roger looked at Morrison Manufacturing like it was some kind of relic, dirty work for simple people. He had bigger plans. That night, I went through my old files, looking for the folder I'd buried in the back of my filing cabinet years ago. Found it behind a stack of tax returns and insurance papers. A thick legal document with Morrison Family Trust printed on the cover. Most people don't read the fine print on legal documents like this. They see the main points and figure that's enough. But I'd learned from my father to read every word of any contract I signed, and this trust document had something buried on page 17 that Dorothy's expensive lawyer had dismissed as extremely unlikely to ever become relevant. I'd insisted on that clause during our divorce negotiations. Dorothy thought it was me being paranoid, trying to create some kind of safety net. Her attorney had advised her to just agree to it so we could finalize the paperwork and get on with our lives. They figured the conditions were so specific that they'd never be met. But I knew something they didn't. I knew my son. I knew that once Roger got control of the company, once he started making the kind of money that impressed his college friends and business contacts, he'd begin to see his old man differently. Not as the craftsman who'd built something worth inheriting, but as an obstacle to progress. A relic from the old days when things moved slower and people cared more about quality than quarterly profits. And I was right. The clause was simple, really. If Roger ever systematically excluded me from meaningful participation in company operations for more than 5 consecutive years, if he treated me like hired help instead of a founding partner, then Dorothy's 60% stake would revert to me automatically upon her death. Roger had been pushing me to the margins for 8 years now. 8 years of being shut out of strategic planning meetings. 8 years of having my input dismissed or ignored. 8 years of watching him make decisions that prioritize short-term profits over the reputation we'd spent decades building. He thought he was protecting his inheritance. What he was actually doing was triggering the very clause that would take it away from him. The Davies and Associates building was one of those downtown towers that screamed expensive legal fees. All marble and brass, with a lobby that could fit my entire shop. The kind of place where they charge you $500 an hour just to sit in the waiting room and look at the fancy artwork on the walls. I'd been in buildings like this before, back during the divorce proceedings. Always felt out of place in my work boots and jeans, surrounded by men in $1,000 suits who spoke in legal jargon and looked at me like I was something that had wandered in from the loading dock. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't the one asking for something. This time, I was holding all the cards, even if nobody else knew it yet. The elevator ride to the 15th floor gave me time to think about what was coming. I'd spent the last 3 days going over that trust document again and again, making sure I understood every word. Called my own lawyer, Pete Kowalski, who'd handled my business contracts for 20 years. Pete had looked over the clause and whistled low. "David, if what you're telling me about Roger's behavior is true, this thing is a legal time bomb," he'd said. Dorothy's lawyers really screwed up when they let this language through. They thought it would never matter, I'd told him. Figured Roger would always treat me fairly. Pete had shaken his head. Rich people, they think money solves everything, even family problems. Sometimes it just makes them worse. The receptionist was young, probably fresh out of college, with the kind of polite smile they teach in business school. She led me down a hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced men in expensive suits. The founding partners, probably, all of them long dead, but still watching over the firm's reputation. The conference room was exactly what I'd expected. Long mahogany table that probably cost more than my truck. Chairs that looked like they belonged in a museum, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the downtown skyline. I could see Morrison Manufacturing's building from here. Not the tallest or fanciest, but solid and well-maintained. The kind of building that would last. Roger was already there, of course, sitting at the head of the table like he owned the place, wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. He was on his phone, making deals or whatever it is corporate executives do to feel important. Didn't even look up when I walked in. Across from him sat a man in his 60s with thinning gray hair and sharp eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. Had to be Mr. Howard, the senior partner. He stood up when I entered, extended a firm handshake. "Mr. Morrison, thank you for coming. Mr. Howard, I appreciate you including me." Roger finally put his phone down, gave me the kind of look you'd give a stray dog that wandered into your backyard. "I told you this was pointless, David. You're wasting everyone's time." "All interested parties were invited," Mr. Howard said diplomatically. "It's standard procedure." "Interested parties?" Roger's voice had an edge to it. "He owns 40% of a company that Mom and I have been running without him for years. This is just a formality." I didn't take the bait, just took a seat halfway down the table, far enough from Roger to avoid any more unpleasant conversation, close enough to hear every word clearly. The silence stretched out, filled only by the hum of downtown traffic 15 floors below, and the occasional tap of Roger's fingers on the polished wood. Mr. Howard arranged his papers with the precision of a man who'd done this hundreds of times. Death was just another business transaction to him, another set of documents to read and legal requirements to fulfill. But for the people sitting around his table, it was the moment when years of planning and hoping and fighting finally came to a conclusion. "Before we begin," Mr. Howard said, adjusting his glasses, "I want to make sure everyone understands that this is the formal reading of Dorothy Morrison's last will and testament, as well as the associated trust documentation. Both documents are legally binding and have been properly executed according to state law." Roger was trying to look somber and respectful, but I could see the anticipation in his eyes. This was his coronation day, the moment he'd been waiting for his entire adult life. In his mind, he was about to officially become the sole owner of everything his parents had built. "Mrs. Morrison's will is quite straightforward," Mr. Howard continued. "She was very clear about her intentions and left detailed instructions for the distribution of her assets." He opened the first folder and began to read in that flat professional tone that lawyers use when they're delivering life-changing news. "I, Dorothy Morrison, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." The preamble went on for several paragraphs, full of the usual legal language about revoking previous wills and confirming mental capacity. Dorothy had always been thorough, even in death. She wanted to make sure there were no loopholes, no ways for anyone to challenge her final wishes. Then came the specific bequests, and Roger's satisfaction was almost visible. The house in Westfield, $850,000 to Roger. Her investment portfolio with Morgan Stanley, $3.2 million to Roger. Her collection of jewelry and art, $400,000 to Roger. Even her car, a BMW she'd bought just 6 months before her death, to Roger. With each item, Roger's posture got a little straighter, his smile a little wider. This was his vindication, proof that his mother had seen him as the worthy heir to everything she'd worked for. Every bequest was another nail in the coffin of my connection to the family fortune. But I wasn't worried, not yet, because the real business hadn't started. Regarding Mrs. Morrison's ownership stake in Morrison Manufacturing and Fabrication, Mr. Howard said, reaching for a different folder, "This requires some additional explanation." Roger's smile faltered just a fraction. "Additional explanation? What kind of explanation?" "The company shares come to me, just like everything else." Mr. Howard's expression didn't change, but he took his time opening the second folder. This one was older, more worn. The papers inside looked yellowed with age. "Mrs. Morrison's 60% stake in the company is held in a trust established at the time of her divorce from Mr. David Morrison," he said carefully. "The trust includes certain provisions that may affect the distribution of these shares." "What kind of provisions?" Roger's voice was sharp now, the confidence starting to crack. "Provisions that were designed to protect the interests of both founding partners," Mr. Howard said. "Provisions that your mother agreed to 15 years ago as part of the divorce settlement." I saw the first flicker of real fear in Roger's eyes. He was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, he didn't know everything he thought he knew about his inheritance. "What provisions?" Roger repeated, his voice rising. "My mother never mentioned any provisions. The company shares are mine. That's what she always told me." Mr. Howard pulled out a document that looked like it had been stored in a filing cabinet for years. The paper was slightly yellowed, the edges soft with age. "This is the Morrison Family Trust, established on June 15, 2008, as part of the divorce settlement between Dorothy Morrison and David Morrison. Roger was leaning forward now, all pretense of casual confidence gone. I've never seen that document before. There was no reason for you to see it, Mr. Howard said calmly. It was a legal agreement between your parents, designed to protect the interests of the company and ensure fair treatment of both founding partners. I could see the wheels turning in Roger's head. He was trying to figure out what this meant, how it could possibly affect his inheritance. In his world, legal documents were simple things. You owned something or you didn't. The idea that there might be conditions attached to ownership, conditions that could change everything, was foreign to him. The trust includes what's called a family harmony clause, Mr. Howard continued, reading from the old document. It states that Mrs. Morrison's 60% ownership stake in Morrison Manufacturing will transfer to the designated beneficiary, in this case, Roger Morrison, upon her death, provided that certain conditions are met. What conditions? I could hear the panic starting to creep into Roger's voice. The primary condition is that the beneficiary must maintain a collaborative and respectful working relationship with the minority shareholder, Mr. David Morrison, for the entire period between the establishment of the trust and Mrs. Morrison's death. Roger's face went pale. Collaborative and respectful? That's completely subjective. How could anyone prove something like that? Mr. Howard turned several pages in the trust document. The clause is quite specific about what constitutes a violation. It includes systematic exclusion from strategic planning, failure to consult on major business decisions, and any pattern of behavior designed to marginalize the minority shareholder's role in company operations. This is ridiculous, Roger said, but his voice was shaking now. I've been running the business side of things, while he handles the shop floor. That's just good management structure. The trust also specifies that violation of the family harmony clause for a period exceeding 5 consecutive years will result in the automatic reversion of the 60% stake to the minority shareholder. The silence that followed was deafening. Roger just sat there, staring at the document like it was written in a foreign language. I could see him trying to do the math in his head, trying to figure out if what I thought was happening was really happening. How long? He asked quietly. Mr. Howard consulted his notes. Our investigation shows that Mr. David Morrison was systematically excluded from executive decision-making, beginning in approximately 2015. That would make it 8 years of documented violations. Investigation? Roger's voice cracked. What investigation? Mr. Howard opened another folder and began laying documents on the table. Email, printouts, meeting minutes, financial records. As executors of the estate, we were legally obligated to verify whether the conditions of the trust had been met. We reviewed company communications, interviewed employees, and examined corporate governance practices. Roger picked up one of the documents with shaking hands. It was an email thread from 3 years ago about a major client proposal. His name was on it, along with the names of several other executives. My name was nowhere to be found. This proves nothing, he said. But he wasn't convincing anyone, especially not himself. Here's another one, Mr. Howard said, placing a second document in front of him. Minutes from the quarterly board meeting last year. As a 40% shareholder, Mr. Morrison should have been included in all board meetings. According to these minutes, he wasn't even notified that the meeting was taking place. I finally spoke up. When's the last time you asked for my opinion on a major business decision, Roger? He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. You handle operations, I handle strategy. That's how modern businesses work. When's the last time you included me in a client presentation? When's the last time you brought me into a discussion about company direction? You wouldn't understand the complexities of try me. Roger's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He was starting to realize that his 8-year campaign to push me to the margins hadn't just hurt my feelings. It had violated the very legal agreement that was supposed to guarantee his inheritance. Mr. Howard placed another document on the table. This is a sworn affidavit from Margaret Collins, your company's longtime bookkeeper. She states that Mr. Roger Morrison frequently made disparaging comments about his father's contributions to the business and actively discouraged other employees from consulting with Mr. David Morrison on operational matters. Maggie said that? Roger looked stunned. Maggie had worked for us for 15 years, had watched Roger grow up. If she was willing to testify against him, it meant his behavior had been even worse than I thought. There's also testimony from several shop floor supervisors who state that Mr. Roger Morrison regularly countermanded his father's operational decisions without consultation, often in front of other employees. I remembered those incidents clearly. Roger would walk into the shop and announce changes to production schedules or quality standards without asking me what I thought, without considering how his decisions would affect the workflow or the morale of the crew. He treated me like a shift supervisor instead of the co-founder of the company. "This can't be legal," Roger said desperately. "You can't just take someone's inheritance away based on workplace dynamics." "The inheritance isn't being taken away," Mr. Howard corrected. "It's being transferred according to the legal terms that your mother agreed to 15 years ago. Terms that were designed to protect both partners in the business." Roger turned to me, his eyes wild. "You planned this. You knew this would happen." "I hoped it wouldn't," I said honestly. "I hoped you'd remember what your mother and I taught you about respect and partnership. I hoped you'd grow into the kind of man who could honor the legacy we built together, but you set this trap anyway. I protected myself the only way I could. Your mother was taking 60% of a company I'd helped build from nothing. The only way I could accept that was if I knew you'd treat me fairly. And you didn't." Roger slumped in his chair, the fight going out of him. For the first time in years, he looked like the boy I'd taught to use a hammer, the kid who used to help me in the shop after school. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who'd forgotten where he came from. "So, what happens now?" he asked quietly. Mr. Howard closed the trust document. "As of this moment, Mr. David Morrison owns 100% of Morrison, manufacturing and fabrication." The words hung in the air like smoke from a welding torch. 100% ownership. Everything Dorothy and I had built, everything we'd sacrificed for, was now mine alone. But looking at my son's devastated face across that mahogany table, victory felt a lot more complicated than I'd imagined it would. Roger sat there staring at his hands, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume he'd borrowed from someone else's life. The golden boy who'd walked into this room an hour ago, thinking he was about to inherit an empire, was gone, replaced by a man who'd just learned that his own arrogance had cost him everything. "This can't be final," he said quietly. "There has to be some way to appeal this, to challenge it in court." Mr. Howard gathered his documents with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd seen this drama play out many times before. "Mr. Morrison, the trust document was legally executed, properly witnessed, and filed with the state, your mother's own. Attorneys reviewed and approved every clause. Any legal challenge would be expensive, time-consuming, and ultimately unsuccessful." "How expensive?" Roger asked. "Hundreds of thousands of dollars." "Possibly more." Roger laughed bitterly. "Money I no longer have access to, since the company was my main source of income." That was true. Roger had been drawing a salary as CEO that was 10 times what any other employee made. Without the company, he'd have to live on whatever Dorothy had left him in the cash and investments. Comfortable, but not the lifestyle he'd grown accustomed to. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 55 years in my back and knees. "Mr. Howard, thank you for handling this professionally. I know it wasn't easy." The lawyer nodded. "Mr. Morrison, you'll need to sign some paperwork to officially transfer the shares, but that can wait until next week. I imagine you have other things to think about right now." He was right. I had a company to run, employees who'd be wondering what Dorothy's death meant for their jobs, clients who needed to know that Morrison Manufacturing would continue to deliver the quality work they expected. Roger was still sitting at the table when I reached the door. He looked smaller somehow, deflated. For a moment, I saw the 8-year-old boy who used to sit on a milk crate in my shop, asking endless questions about how things worked. "Roger," I said. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "There's always a job for you at Morrison Manufacturing, if you want it." His laugh was harsh. "Doing what?" "Sweeping floors, learning the business, the real business, from the ground up. I have an MBA from Wharton, and I have 30 years of experience building things that last. Your choice which one you think is more valuable." I left him there and walked out into the hallway, past those stern portraits of dead lawyers, down to the marble lobby, and out onto the street where real people were going about their daily lives. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Lawyers, paperwork, meetings with accountants and insurance agents, all the bureaucratic nonsense that comes with major business changes. But the real work was happening in the shop, where I sat down with every employee individually to explain what had happened and what it meant for their future. Most of them were relieved. They'd been worried that Roger would sell the company to some corporate outfit that would slash payroll and move production overseas. Knowing that I was going to keep things running the way they always had been, focusing on quality, treating employees fairly, maintaining our reputation for craftsmanship, gave them the security they needed. I brought back the 3 guys Roger had laid off last year. Tommy Rodriguez, who'd been with us for 18 years before Roger decided his position was redundant. Mike Sullivan, our best Finnish welder, who Roger had replaced with a cheaper contractor, and Frank Kowalski, Pete's nephew, who knew more about custom metalwork than most engineers. It felt good to walk through the shop again and see all the bays full, hear the sound of productive work being done by people who cared about what they were building. 3 weeks after the will reading, Roger called me. "David?" His voice was different, quieter, less certain. "Roger. How are you holding up? I've been thinking about what you said, about learning the business." I waited. Pushing him wouldn't help. This had to be his decision. "Would you really give me a job after everything that's happened? You're Dorothy's son. You're my son. There'll always be a place for you here." "What kind of job?" "The same kind I started with when I was your age. Entry level. Learn how things actually work before you try to manage them." A long pause. "What would that look like?" 6 a.m. start time. Work clothes, not suits. You'd start in the shop, learning basic fabrication techniques. After a few months, if you prove you can handle that, maybe we move you into project management. But you'd have to earn it. 6 a.m.? That's when the real work starts, Roger. Not in conference rooms downtown. Another pause. "I'll think about it. Take your time. The offer stands." But I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, Roger showed up at the shop at 5:55 a.m., wearing jeans and work boots that still had the price tags on them. His hands were soft from years of office work, his back wasn't used to the physical demands of the job, and he had to learn everything from scratch. The other guys were skeptical at first. They remembered how Roger had treated them when he was running things, but he kept his mouth shut, did whatever work he was given, and slowly started to earn their respect. It's been 6 months now. Roger's got calluses on his hands and muscles in his back. He's learned to read blueprints, to calculate material requirements, to spot potential problems before they become expensive mistakes. More importantly, he's learning what it means to build something with your own hands, to take pride in craftsmanship rather than just profit margins. We still don't talk much outside of work. Some relationships take time to heal, and ours was broken for a lot of years. But yesterday I found him in the shop after hours, practicing his welding technique on a piece of scrap steel. When he pulled off his helmet, there was sweat on his forehead, and something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine satisfaction with work well done. That's when I knew Dorothy's plan had worked. Our son was finally coming home. Sometimes the best revenge isn't taking everything away from someone. It's giving them the chance to earn back what they lost through honest work and genuine respect. A father's greatest victory isn't proving he was right all along, but watching his son discover the values that really matter when the money and titles are stripped away.